Okay, well, it is time for an update on the ET8. And it's kind of a joke on me, but it's also going to be a thing that I need to deal with. So when the ET8 failed, I contacted Banggood is who I bought it through, and they initially said they could not get parts. But as you can see from the bag that I just opened, when they said they would send me a replacement, there was a little bit of communication about finding the package and making sure it was sent and getting tracking information, and then it arrived, and they did in fact get parts. So I took the ET8 apart to see what it looked like, and because they said they were sending an entire new engine, but now I have parts. So I guess we're going to learn how to put the ET8 back together, and we'll see how that goes. But first things first, since this is here and we know it's an issue, in fact, they know it's an issue. Look at that. The wrist pin on that cylinder is Loctited in place now. So for anybody watching these, the early engines, all the wrist pins were loose. Part of the issue with the ET8 is that its wrist pin was loose, and here's the old piston. It has a big scrape there, but it has a big scratch on the side, and the wrist pin is not polished on the end, and it was definitely loose inside there when I took it apart. And it has this big scrape from where the loose wrist pin rattled against the side and made a big scratch in the old cylinder lining. They do in fact check on all our YouTube channels and engage in improvement on these engines. So that's really nice. And honestly, the experience I've had with these has been very positive. Even the issues with the ET8, getting the replacement parts was mostly a language issue and not necessarily, anything else. So I'm just gonna throw some lube down in that small end there while we start work on putting this back together. So because I'm thinking of it immediately and I don't want to forget to do this correctly, I am gonna put together the valve body here, and that means putting these lifter pins in, which if I was really gonna prepare for this, I would probably have gotten some tweezers for maneuvering all these tiny parts, but being stubborn, there we go. And just put a drop of oil around each of those before they and then I'm checking to see that they ride pretty smoothly. Otherwise I would try reversing them to see if they fit differently. So those are in, flat side, and then the cupped end to hold the rods in place. And now I have the gear here with the cams on it, and the gear is helical, so it doesn't have an upside or downside to it. It just is gonna slot into the other gear, and there's the pin, and there were washers. Like I did when I took this apart, just put all the parts into a tub in case, because I did suspect that this is what would happen, where I would be told there were no parts, and then parts would be found and sent away. I did not, however, take careful notes about where these washers all were, so there may be an issue with that. Because there are 4 washers here, but this washer is very heavy and these other 3 are shim washers. So I am spin that around so the flats are there, and I'm going to push the pin in carefully and look at how that spacing looks. So I think that I want to, yeah, alright. So what I'm going to do is pull this out, slide that pin in, put two shim washers, the 3 thin shim washers, on the what will be the top, and then slip the big fat one in there, and then there we go. That is started, okay. And that's not fitting very well, so I'm going to get this flathead bit out and put it in the screwdriver thing. And all right. More oil. And probably should have put some oil on that pin as I was working it in. Let's see here. Spun that so it's loose. There we go. I'm trying to hold this vertical so that those washers don't move. Put a drop of oil right in the end there. There. There we go. All right. Because now there's oil everywhere again. All right. So we got that assembly put together, and we'll just set that aside and start putting the base back together. Now, we have the journals and the main cylinder body, and these holes are not evenly spaced, so we know what way around to put it. And then I need to double check which I think these, oh wait, and there's a short one. There's actually an array of shorter screws here. Let's see now. The head bolts are smaller, so we definitely know those aren't correct. All right, these short ones are for the bearing caps. So put those like that. All right. And these are the ones that are just a size bigger than my set of screw bits go. So there, the right hex key set out there. 1, 2, 3, 4. I do like my mini bit set just because the little bits can be used to spin these in. So obviously there's not a lot of alignment involved in putting the cylinder on, putting the cylinder part on, just because it's got everything together. The bearing journals, though, there's a left and a right, and then from the other repairs I've done, we know that they get put loosely on, but then they have to be lined up using the crankshaft. So just and then this one, the left and right, well, all of them, all of the ET engines. Alright, check and make sure that still wiggles a little bit. All of the ET engines, they have the outside of the bearing journal has got this raised bit, and the inside is flat. For the ET8, it's got these 3 mounting holes for the valve gear and the valve gear cover. So and I'm gonna have to assemble most of the engine to make sure it's all like in order and lined up properly, and then after it's been lined up properly is when it can be attached to the base and have the ignition put back in it. So that wiggles a little bit. Alright. The second O-ring I left in there because I couldn't get it out, so we're going to put the first O-ring in, and this is hard to see, but I just push one corner into the groove and then gently work it in with my fingers. There we go. So that is that. That's the here's the new one with the 2 new rings. They did provide 2 new rings for the sleeve to seal to the cylinder, the cooling hopper and everything, but I'm gonna just keep those aside and not use them. So we'll put a dab of oil on this and see if that lubricating those rings will help. There we go. Pushed past the first one and the second one and in place, and I'm running my finger across the sleeve to make sure that it stands a little bit proud of the head here, so that it's going to be the thing sealing against the head gasket and not and it won't sit recessed like the ET1 we discovered. So it is by feel just a teeny bit proud. I also, if I look very carefully, it appears to be a bit proud. If you need to figure out something else, you can lay a straight edge across here and look to see if a little bit of light comes in at the edge here. So that should be in good shape. when I pulled this apart, it didn't feel particularly hard to get in and out, so I did the extra ring from the first piston. I'm gonna put a second ring on this ET8 because it does run a lot harder and hotter than the other engines, so yeah. And a bit of oil from when I dropped oil in there has worked its way outside, so I'm just smearing that around the outside of the piston and slipping the piston in place. Here are the crank bearings. So put that in place. The main bearings aren't split, so they just stayed on the crankshaft because they're permanently installed like that. And so, alright. So what I'm doing here is I have my, I'm sticking actually my middle finger down here to hold the piston in place. And I have the engine tipped like this so that the weight of the crankshaft will hold it in place. And now I'm going to very carefully push that half bearing so that it's kind of in place there. Put a dab of oil and rotate that so that the oil works in under that. Oh, and I wasn't careful enough there. Make sure the oil is worked in there, and then another dab of oil, the other half of the crank bearing, and then the big end strap. Because the bearing is only supposed to be sliding on the inside, we don't have to worry about lubricating the outside of the big end strap, the outside of the bearing on the big end strap. There is the other. Nope. That's the other bolt for the big end. Now, there. Okay, so the big end just needs to be finger tight right now, so that I can get these caps in place. So the caps actually get tightened in place because they're going to help us do the actual lineup. So tighten one cap. Alright. The caps are in place. The big end is also in place. I'm just going to rotate this a little bit. It is not binding, so we're going to keep it so that we can keep rotating and checking it as we tighten the screws underneath here. So there we go. Perfect. Alright, well, we're going to make sure those are nice and tight now. Beautiful. There. So that is how to get these journals here lined up again. If you take this all the way apart, which, you know, we learned the other time when I was fixing whichever engine I dropped on the ground. I can't remember if that was the ET6 or the ET7. So there we go. Except I just looked at this and I put the crankshaft in upside down. So, because the helical gear needs to be on this side and the ignition needs to be on the other side. But we have to pull this apart again anyway. Well, I was going to pop this apart anyway because it's going to be easier for me to put the ignition back on it without the flywheels in the way. I just planned on doing that after I had it back on the box, so just pop the big end off, rotate that so that the piston is down and out of the way. The oil helps keep that main bearing in place too, or that crank bearing in place, so with